Hello and welcome back to another episode of Armchair Analysts, the only podcast that thinks James Milner could be a steady pro in any sport. My name is Cameron McDonald, and I've spent 3 years working as an FA licensed intermediary here in the UK. My co-host, Rupert Meadows, has written and broadcasted about all things football on platforms such as TalkSport Radio and Give Me Sport. But above all else, we're fans.
Yeah, thanks for that, Cam. After a short lull, football is back with a vengeance, and so by extension are we. Pre-season is in full flow as teams return to full strength following the international tournaments, although the Olympic football is still going on, apparently, so I'm told. With the gold medal match between Brazil and Spain taking place this Saturday. As always, timestamps are in the description, and starting us off is the two biggest stories of the week, both concerning Man City, Jack Grealish and Harry Kane.
Two bigger stories indeed, and I want to take these in slightly separate ways because I think that the two conversations surrounding these two transfers have their similarities but also are different in very big ways. And I want to start with Jack Grealish before we move on to Harry Kane and the whole complex scenario that's getting more and more ugly by the second. And that's just to ask the question of whether Jack Grealish should leave Aston Villa to join Manchester City. And it's something I've been thinking about a little bit over the last few weeks because it's a conversation that you go online and you see Villa fans. Obviously, Villa is a very old, very proud club with, the last trophy they won being a trophy that has yet eluded Manchester City, the European Cup. And so some Villa fans arguably rightly believe that, playing for Villa is still as enticing as playing for these, some of these other clubs, especially something like Man City that doesn't have as much of a history. Not least because Jack Grealish himself is, a boyhood Villa fan. His grandfather played for Villa. There's a huge connection to the club. And Aston Villa are in a period at the moment. They've just come off the back of a really, really strong season. They've followed that up with another really, really strong summer where they're making a load of interesting signings. Buendia was a fantastic signing. They look to have just signed Leon Bailey, which is another interesting signing. They're making all sorts of interesting moves, whether it's inquiring after Emil Smith-Rowe or James Ward-Prowse. So they're really not messing around. And while some people will say, they've made all these moves knowing that they're going to be making money from Jack Grealish, another way that you could look at it is sort of just them trying to kick on. They signed, obviously, Ollie Watkins and Emi Martinez last season, which was a fantastic way to sort of kick on and went from being relegation contenders to a nice, comfortable mid-table side. If they keep kicking on now, is it weird to think that they could keep improving? And it made me think of how Leicester won the FA Cup this most recent season. And I was kind of wondering to myself, I don't think there's a yes-no answer to this because only Jack Grealish himself will know. But if you're Jack Grealish and you're a boyhood Villa fan, would you maybe want to stick around for one more season and win Aston Villa's first silverware since I think it's 1982? Or do you want to go to City now? Because I think Jack Grealish, really, he's 25. If he doesn't move this window, I don't think it's going to be all over for him. I don't think he's going to have his Wilfried Zaha moment. But you can also understand why. He could. And players, it's always, one injury could derail it. But I maybe I've just seen the opinions of loads of Villa fans over the last week, but I can see the appeals to staying at Villa. Obviously, also I can see the appeals to going to Manchester City because you're guaranteed the league and you're guaranteed top wages. But, I mean, what do you think? Do you think he should leave and sign for Man City, or do you think he could stick it out for another year?
I think that it's always been one more year for Jack Grealish, for at least maybe 2 or 3 seasons. And it's come to the point where, yes, Villa fans will say he could stay where a prestigious club, and they are, of course, they've got a great history, but they're not competing at the same level in terms of things like Champions League. And while they are building something special, or it seems like they are at the moment, I do think that they are just a couple of losing a couple of big players away from slipping back to kind of very firmly mid to bottom table side. And yes, they did really well last season. They had a great time, but they still finished 11th. They're still a ways off the pace in terms of, if you're talking about building something similar to Leicester, that will take a while. And Leicester's a good example because the obvious person to look at there is someone like Riyad Mahrez. And you can look at how Riyad Mahrez went from playing every week to being used sporadically. You can look at the fact that Leicester continued to grow without him. But I'm pretty sure that if you asked Riyad Mahrez if he regretted moving, he would say, hell no. I've had some amazing nights at City, for example, against PSG in the Champions League last season. And I think that Jack Grealish has earned the chance to play at the top level with top level players.
I think the interesting thing about Manchester City at the moment is that they are in a unique position certainly of Premier League clubs, in that they have this combination of, if you move there, you're essentially guaranteed to win the league at some point. And we have seen that with some teams in the past, most notably Man United. But where City differ is that, you've sort of touched on it there, you're guaranteed to win the league, but you're also pretty much guaranteed to not be playing full seasons. All of these players, whether it's a Mahrez or a Sterling or a Bernardo Silva or a Ferran Torres or whoever, or Phil Foden, they all sort of have games here and there. And I guess it comes down, personally to if you're thinking, do I want to play every game? Or if you've taken it to that level and you're at Manchester City, you don't need to play every game because you've already proven your point. You're playing for a team that challenges for the highest honours. I do think the difference between, I think Mahrez is a really good comparison because I do agree, very similar situations. Mahrez sort of did take that step up, has now won the league even more times. He's sort of playing at the top level. He's playing in all these huge Champions League fixtures. I think the key difference, though, is that unlike Jack Grealish, he's not a local lad. He didn't really have any tie to Leicester beyond them being the team that brought him into English football, and he won the league with them.
Sure.
So he had that sentimental tie in terms of being part of that, but it's not like, he was growing up down the road from the stadium, whereas Jack Grealish does have that emotional tie, seemingly, and a lot of Villa fans think so. And I think he has.
He definitely does.
He has always expressed a lot of love for the club. I mean, incidentally, I don't think that it would be, unlike the other transfer we might talk about in this sort of sense, I think he'd be completely justified to leave if he did want to leave. But I do also think, it's hard to, if that were me and I was playing for a club like Villa and my granddad had played for it and my whole family were fans and I had the chance to, win them their first trophy in ages, and basically he's already a Villa legend, but he'll be a Villa legend. He'll be like statue level legend if he wins them their first trophy since the 80s. Which I think would be such a potentially enticing reason to just, if the right person at the club pitched that to me, to go, yeah, go on then, one more year.
Then. Yeah, you're right. There's always going to be that sweetheart idea of like, do I want to stay? Do I want to commit to this club? I think that the other point to make is maybe international football. So if he does leave Villa and join City, and if the player we're going to talk about also joins City, I mean, you're looking at a front three potentially of Raheem Sterling, Jack Grealish, and Harry Kane, with Phil Foden in behind. And that's the kind of like nexus that an international side would use, and that could, elevate Jack Grealish from being a squad player to being almost like a nailed-on starter. So I think it does make sense for him personally, for his career, to move, obviously, to go to City, but you wouldn't begrudge him his emotions if he did decide to stay.
You definitely wouldn't. And with the City thing, although rotation still is a big part of Pep's managerial style, it is really key to note that both Riyad Mahrez, who has sort of been rumoured to maybe be leaving this window, it doesn't look like that's happening now, but Riyad Mahrez and Kevin De Bruyne are both 30. So Jack Grealish is 25. He might be sort of sitting around apprenticing those two for a while, but in 1 or 2 or 3 years, when either they've left or they start to go a bit on the downturn, Jack Grealish could be the main attacking midfielder at Manchester City, or sort of him and Phil Foden could sort of step into those roles. So you could see him sort of going like, okay, yeah, well, if I make the move now, because there's always a new young player coming up, isn't there? So if he misses the chance now,
for sure,
it might be either someone who is at City's academy, it might be someone else. They might, Jack Harrison might have a really good season this year at Leeds, and City will buy him back. So yeah, I mean, there's a part of me that thinks there isn't a huge sense of urgency for someone like Jack Grealish, but at the same time, there's always an injury, there's always the chance of this, there's always a chance of, someone else coming through. So, yeah, I can see either way.
I think it's more just momentum, right? So Jack Grealish I think he's achieved, apart from getting that silverware, which is not, by any means guaranteed, he's achieved everything that he could achieve, and I think he's grown almost as much as he could grow at Villa. I think the only thing that I would be worried about for him is adapting, because it's often quite jarring to go from being the talisman, the go-to for every single attacking play, to being more of a bit part team player. So my only concern with him going would be, is he going to be able to capture and play as well as he has played at Villa, at City? Yeah,
definitely something to be interesting to see, and how, consistent game time plays into his performances. For example, at the Euros, he didn't get consistent game time, and although he had a decent tournament, I mean, he didn't really have the chance to show off, but he wasn't at the sort of one of the best players around level that he looked at last season in the Premier League. I mean, what I would say about his time at Villa is that I think he's always, for a long time anyway, he's been very, very highly rated. And if you think about last season and the season before everyone was saying, Jack Grealish is fantastic, it's just a bit of a shame that he plays for a side that let him down. Last season, because he had more players, and not all the players, and I still don't think Villa do have all the players, but because he had more players to help him look good, I think you made the comment, months and months and months ago, we were talking about a Villa game, and you said something to the effect of, and you can see how much someone like Ollie Watkins has come in, because normally Jack Grealish would have to, pass that ball himself and also receive it. Yeah, exactly. And I just think about that, and I think about, he's now going to be potentially playing in a front line with not only Ollie Watkins, but Emiliano Buendia and Leon Bailey, and I think he could look even better for Villa than he has already. I think he could, in theory, have an even stronger season. And if Villa were to, slip into top 6 or to win the FA Cup or something, that could just be so huge for him and for, obviously his family and his whole background. But at the same time, you go to Manchester City, especially with the other moves they're looking to make this window, and you're probably winning the league straight up.
Yeah, and if all goes well and he continues to play as we know he can, he is just taking another step towards, top players in Europe.
Yeah, and the thing is, obviously, what I was saying there, he could always wait another year for the move. The other way that could happen, the sort of reverse of that, is he could always just go back to Villa when he's older. Something about him sort of screams Shearer-esque to me. Like, you can see him going to Manchester City, and then maybe he has another move there to, La Liga or something, or he just stays at Man City for a few years, and then at, 31 or 32, he has, a real, swan song season for Aston Villa.
For sure.
And sort of either saves them from the drop, or they have a really good run, and sort of the club are really happy about it. And he plays every game, so you could see that happening as well. Overall, it does seem like whether he stays or goes, the mood surrounding it has been quite good. He has, of course, turned up for training for the last 2 days,
which is kind of him, isn't it?
It is kind of him, much unlike the other player that we're going to be talking about with Manchester City, which is Harry Kane. And my initial question for you is to ask whether you think Harry Kane is justified in his strike. Do you think it's right and proper and the correct course of action for a player like him to be taking? Or do you think he's in the wrong there?
It's such a loaded question because there's no easy answer to this. Obviously, it's a balance between being a professional, but also recognizing that there's at times a strange dynamic between kind of clubs owning people. And the reason, the one thing I would say that's kind of pushing me towards the fact that I think maybe it's justified is that what I know of Daniel Levy is such that he holds on to people so tightly as much as he can, and I think that if Harry Kane is just going to be miserable at Tottenham and he wants to leave and Spurs can get a lot of money for him, then I think he should be allowed to do that.
It's interesting though, because there's so many things at play that people are taking at either face value or putting a lot of weight on. One of the things that keeps coming up is this rumoured gentleman's agreement. And, Harry Kane apparently believes he has a gentleman's agreement with the club. Daniel Levy apparently is saying that no such agreement exists, which by no means no such agreement exists, but just that's what he's saying. But it's interesting as well because, again, a lot of people, particularly Spurs fans, are absolutely adamant he won't leave. And there is the matter of, a 3-year contract left in the balance. But, the last 2 really high-profile players in Luka Modric and Gareth Bale to leave Spurs also had exactly the same summer. Daniel Levy was swearing blind they wouldn't leave. And I can't remember Luka Modric, but I do remember Gareth Bale had a little bit of a failure to turn up for training in much the same way. So maybe this is just the way things go. Players have to sort of fight their way out. And it's just, if you're a Spurs fan, it's probably the worst way this could happen. Because I think with Grealish,
how can it not sour things,
Yeah, exactly. But the thing with Grealish is City have come in reportedly with £100 million. If Villa accept it, and you're a Villa fan, fine, some, very dyed-in-the-wool Villa fans might be like, oh, I can't believe he's left us for City, for the reasons that we've just talked about. But hopefully the most level-headed will go, you know what, he gave us some great years, he wants to go and play in the Champions League, and we've been well remunerated.
Sure.
And Jack Grealish himself has turned up for training, he hasn't done anything disrespectful. Whereas if you're a Spurs fan, you must be in real conflict right now, because on the one hand, I'm sure as a Spurs fan, you probably support the players more than the club structure.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Particularly at the moment when they're not particularly popular with the fans. But at the same time, it must be difficult to reconcile that, liking Harry Kane and appreciating everything he's done for the club, but also the fact that he's now, refusing to honour his contract with the club, which is, it's not like it's a situation where the club have sneakily extended his deal. He chose to extend that deal by 6 years, supposedly showing his love for the club and his support for the club, and now has turned around and gone, okay, I don't care anymore. I don't want to honour that.
Well, I mean, the other thing is to remember that obviously a lot has changed in the club since then as well. It's not that he's the one that's suddenly turned around and gone, I no longer want to be a part of this project. The project's changed 3 times over since he signed that deal. The manager's different, and I think it's pretty legit, and I think it's a shame that he's been put in that situation. He maybe could be handling a little better. I think that it'd be interesting, because I, for example, don't know if him not showing up for training is damaging any sort of transfer value that the club are going to get for him, because obviously it's easier to go into a negotiation room when you know that the player literally will not play for you again, play for the team again. It's a lot easier for City to turn around and be like, well, we could give you 100, but you need to get rid of him. He's 80.
Yeah, I suppose it's how far it goes. I mean, there was a really interesting piece on the Analysts today sort of talking about, these different high-profile strikes. And I was thinking about high-profile strikes myself and how many, examples I could think of players doing that and just, refusing to turn up for training. And even in recent years, you've had sort of like Virgil van Dijk did it to Southampton to force his move to Liverpool, Raheem Sterling with Liverpool to force his move to City, Thibaut Courtois with Chelsea to force his move to Real Madrid. And, while the interesting thing here that is different is that none of those players were ever sort of the club man, and Harry Kane is very much Mr. Spurs. This is a lot more commonplace than it used to be. In this Athletic article, they talked about a Nottingham Forest player called Pierre van Hooijdonk. So if you remember that, and you listen to this podcast, hats tipped to you. But they were talking about how, the reaction to that in 1998 was absolutely, thunderous. The manager said after he returned, if he thinks we're going to offer him an olive branch, he knows where he can stick it. The player didn't return to training for 3 months.
Yeah.
The other players, not just the manager, were absolutely furious at him and were saying sort of they thought he was taking the piss, didn't support him. Whereas now, there's sort of a general acceptance of players doing this. In the Thibaut Courtois example, Eden Hazard sort of described him as a top player. Described Diego Costa when he did it as a top player, and Thibaut Courtois, all the Chelsea players were sort of like, well, this is just what happens. And even sort of the response of, former pros, Rio Ferdinand came out with a tweet today and sort of said, well, he's given it his all for the club. When the dust settles, they'll remember him for the positive way. So going on strike is more and more commonplace these days. We see it more often. And it has almost become, especially at Spurs, like the way that you get a move. And the weirdest part about it is that if Gareth Bale and Harry Kane both manage to force their way out of the club using this sort of unceremonious way of exiting, is that how all Spurs players are going to leave from now on?
Well, it's interesting because for every Harry Kane that's willing to do it, I'm quite confident if you told N'Golo Kante that he'd have to not turn up to training to force his way out of Chelsea or to force his way out of Leicester, he just would never have done it. There are some players that would see that as something they wouldn't be willing to do. So it's kind of it's like a form of bullying. It's like you're going to need to sever your relationship with the fans to an extent in order to force your way out of the club. It's a shame. I do agree with Rio Ferdinand that he's given his all. I mean, he's put so much into Spurs over the last few years. And yeah, the fact that Pochettino's not there anymore, that's who he committed to. To me, it's just I think that you would hope that he can leave on good terms.
It does make you wonder, and I have a shout out to give in this moment, but it makes you wonder why sort of more players, and this works both ways in terms of clubs putting these things in, but there aren't more conditional contracts. Like, how it's really common for teams that are sort of either newly promoted or finished last season in the relegation zone, or sorry, just above the relegation zone, to have like clauses in their players' contracts that are like, if we get relegated, you can leave. Yeah. It's surprising that doesn't happen more in terms of things like, if we don't finish top 4 or if we don't win a trophy or something like that, because that would make a lot of sense. Because for someone like Harry Kane, clearly, as we've seen now, he stayed because he thought the club was going to meaningfully kick on and challenge for trophies in a more real way.
Yeah.
They haven't, and now he wants to leave. Seems to me that a way that all parties could have been satisfied, both, and it would work both ways, because then Spurs would have that extra motivation to kick on, because they'd go, oh God, we've got to win it or he's off. And now this sort of deal, and you wouldn't have these players sort of besmirching the name of the club by just not turning up for training. Yeah, it just seems these conditional contracts would make more sense. Speaking of Kane's contract, I've just got to shout out Charlie Kane, perhaps the worst agent of all time. He looks after one client who is his brother, and his sole action in the agency world so far seems to be signing a 6-year contract, advising his client to sign a 6-year contract. Halfway through, he turns around and goes, leave.
Yeah, he definitely goofed that one up a little bit.
It's like, because all the rumours about, like, and again, allegedly, I don't want to get in trouble, but allegedly, like, the whole City leak started from him saying it at a wedding to someone. So he's the agent who's, like, passed Harry Kane the pen, in all likelihood, probably, to sign this 6-year contract, and at no point is to, like, try to argue Spurs down. And then is also apparently one of the main forces behind Kane wanting to leave Spurs.
Yeah, well, I heard it was Kane that did it at his brother's wedding, wasn't it? Kane was the one that leaked it in his, like, speech. In his best man speech.
What is it? It's like, oh, you're a lovely couple. Come visit me in Manchester sometime.
He literally was like, oh, I'm really going to miss you guys when I'm up in Cheshire, kind of thing.
Good Lord.
But yeah, I
can't wait for those tapes to get leaked.
I think that there are a few things that I want less than to listen to Harry Kane make a best man speech, even if there's things like that in it.
Yeah, it will be a hard slog. Yeah, you open the sound file, it's like 15 minutes. You're like, oh God.
But yeah, I think I can see why it doesn't happen, because it's obviously not in the club's best interests, and when you're a top club, you have more weight on you to negotiate contracts. But you're right, it does feel like a lot of players get sold a dream that they then are unable to escape from. I mean, the one that springs to mind in recent memory is like Willian. Got told that like they were going to win Champions League. He was like, cool, sign me up.
I think that he said that was his ambition. He was like, I want to win the Champions League with this club, and I was like,
he was like, Arteta told me I'm here to win the Champions League.
Okay, bro.
That was his quote. That was his little soundbite.
It just seems, because I agree, it would depend on the player, and obviously with top clubs they're in a position to exert their force. But this was Harry Kane to Spurs. If anything, Spurs were the ones holding the begging bowl in that negotiation. So surely he would have had the position to go, okay, I will sign a 6-year contract with you at a time when I'm already one of the most highly rated strikers in the world, but here are my conditions. And the conditions are, we've got to continue kicking on, we've got to do all that. It just seems like, because it's something that's so common in other areas. Like even when you look at so many signings that go on these days, especially when it's sort of younger players, and you get these sort of things where it's like, 50 million potentially rising to 80 million because there's a Ballon d'Or clause, and there's a 30 goals in a season clause, and there's a, as soon as they score 100 goals for the club clause, and there's all these different clauses. It seems like football clubs are really au fait with making these work with each other, but players and a lot of the people surrounding those players haven't really cottoned on that they can do that as well.
Well, I mean, it's a good example, Harry Kane, because he has, Charlie to do his negotiating for him. Not very much of a professional in the field of contract negotiation. And we've spoken a little bit about how it's interesting when the professional and non-professional sides of football blend in different ways, because you just do see clubs being run horrendously badly and things like that. So I think I can just picture it so easily, like how the conversation went down. I'm sure he was just like, I want my client wants this much per week, and then they obviously savvily were like, well, we're willing to do that if you sign on for longer, and so they just tied him in. And if you're not used to negotiating or being in a negotiating room, then you just don't have. Yeah, I think it's dumb. That's
just what. Yeah, every time someone has a family member as their agent, it just always makes me think like,
so common. It's like your dad or your brother or.
It is weirdly common even at the top level in terms of like you see a few high profile, but most high profile players or most players, like you can't have an agent in this country anyway until you're 16. I'm not sure about the rules everywhere else. I'm pretty sure. Like Xavi Simons was signed up by Raiola when he was like 14, 15, maybe. I might be wrong about that.
Yeah.
But at least in this country, you can't have an actual intermediary until you're 16. So your family looks after your sort of rights and stuff until then.
The likes of Jorge Messi.
Yeah, yeah. So that kind of, it makes sense to me why, if you're sort of up to 16, your parents look after your stuff, and even up to maybe 18, 19, they're sort of going, well, we've worked on this so far. But when you get to that point, when you're getting to the point where Harry Kane, for a long time now, has been a player worth in the hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
That's so much to be putting on. Like, I would argue it's almost mean to do to his brother to be like, look after my thing, because his brother was probably like part. I mean, I don't know what his brother's like. His brother might be thinking like, oh, I'm a big boss, but he might be there just like sweating every day, like, oh my gosh, I could completely bungle this 6-year contract that I've agreed to.
It's probably a bit of both, but it's like, obviously you want to get your entourage involved, and you want to get your brother onto like making good money for himself. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure, but don't make him your agent. Have him be like, your executive, like, newspaper delivery. Like, he brings it from the front door to the breakfast table. He's on 70k a week. Do that.
Good job, man.
Yeah, do that. Don't make him in charge of your financial affairs.
Yeah, I mean, that is where the line should be drawn. What do you think? Do you think Kane is justified in his position?
I personally do. And I think he is, because it's a unique situation, I think he's justified because respect is a two-way street in sort of contract issues and, how the club deals with them. We don't know if this gentleman's agreement is necessarily a real thing. But what we do know is that transfers work a little bit differently at Tottenham Hotspur. Most clubs, even if they have you sign on for a few years, if someone comes in with a relatively reasonable offer, which, 130 million, well, they've only done 100 million so far, but 130 million is the supposed limit that Man City have gone for, and apparently Spurs won't go for that, and this is where sort of the big loggerhead is. I just feel like with most other clubs, if an offer of that size or an offer relative to the player's value comes in, they'll go yes, whereas Spurs, they just have these certain rules, as we saw with sort of like Luka Modric when he got sold to Real Madrid for less than than Chelsea had offered a year prior. You're kind of not playing on a fair field. You're not giving your players the normal treatment that most other players get, and so you can't fully expect them to treat you the same way, which is why you've seen it happen with Gareth Bale, and now you're seeing it happen with Harry Kane, and in a few years' time, if they have another player come up, like Dele Alli somehow turns around, or Heung-min Son, who bizarrely has just signed a new contract as well, which is weird timing, but if that happens again, I won't be surprised at all, because the club treats its players in a certain way, and it's sort of like, right, you've signed a contract with us, you're shackled to us for life, whereas most other clubs, they try not to get their best players to leave, but are kind of like, well, if we've been offered a good amount of money and the player wants to leave, we'll honour that.
Yeah, it's a balance, isn't it? And it doesn't feel like Spurs have it quite right. I mean, I think the flip side of the coin is like, do you let, for example, Chelsea letting Petr Cech leave for London rivals Arsenal for free? That's maybe giving them almost too much respect. But there is a balance to be struck there, but I agree with you that Spurs seem to be on the wrong side of it.
I would have the rivals clause. Like, I'm of mine, you should never ever sell to a rival.
Well, that's kind of what I think of with the Luka Modric, for example.
To Chelsea, yeah. So maybe that one is fair, but Spurs' thing is supposedly
City are a rival of Spurs for the title. I think.
Is that true?
To let Kane go to Real Madrid for that much money than you would be to Spurs City. Sorry.
I can see why you maybe accept slightly less, but the idea that they're not going to sell to anyone, and it's like City and Spurs. Are they? I mean, obviously they're not traditional rivals, but sometimes you can have non-traditional rivals, like how Liverpool and Man City have sort of become quote-unquote rivals over the last few years.
Yeah.
Have Spurs challenged for the title at all in this era of City dominance? Really?
No, they're not. But you're weakening yourself and you're strengthening a domestic rival.
A domestic rival
in a loose term.
But for me, the rival clause would be very specifically someone who is directly challenging you in the table for a nearby place, or one of your traditional rivals. So, for example, let's say at the moment Chelsea and Leicester, or Man United and Leicester. I can understand why one wouldn't sell to the other, because in theory, a player that goes from one club to the other could be the difference in a top four battle at the end of the season.
Sure.
Whereas Spurs and City, I don't think that.
Yeah, but
I don't think that Harry Kane moving one way is really going to like change the power balance between those two.
It's kind of like,
City will be even better than they already are than Spurs, but I don't think that anything beyond a meteor hitting the Etihad Stadium is going to mean that Spurs finish above City this season.
It's something like imagine like someone like Jake Paul seeing Floyd Mayweather as his rival, and Floyd Mayweather's like, no.
Exactly.
Like City, Spurs will think of City as their rival a lot more than the reverse.
Yeah, exactly. Oh god, that Man City. Like, who?
Who are you?
Yes, the North London Whites.
I don't even know who you are.
Some other interesting stuff that came out today, which is great because, again, we've got some investigative journalism from your man Charlie Uckleshare. So apparently, according to Athletic again, it's been revealed that Kane has spoken to a senior non-English Manchester City player prior to Monday to inform him of his desire to join the club, which is also interesting. I wonder who that is, a non-English Man City player that Harry Kane would know. I feel like his... and again, I don't know the guy. I feel like his circle would be
English.
or exclusively English.
He's only got the one language. I also was trying to work that out, and I'm not really sure who it could have been. I mean, maybe just someone he met up with or had bumped into or something like that. Or I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I always find it interesting, like the players' friendships. Like, we were talking earlier about that Avengers group of footballers, and I'm like, how are Dele Alli and Bukayo Saka friends?
Why are they all together?
But yeah,
Would someone like Kevin De Bruyne?
Maybe, but when have these two would have struck up a friendship?
All right, Kev, how you doing?
Yeah, it's weird, but yeah, some
they would surely like challenge for the most boring conversation of all time.
Kevin De Bruyne, like, maybe that's why he revealed it. It was just like sat in a room with like your father-in-law or something that you just have nothing to say to him.
So looking forward to coming to City.
So good summer, I'm coming to City. Apparently also Summit City became aware over the weekend that Kane's intention was not to train or play for Spurs again. So he's missed 2 days so far, and this is sort of coming from the Athletic that he's not planning to train or play for them at all. So, if this goes the way we expect it to, with Daniel Levy being very stubborn and Harry Kane sticking to this, then it's going to continue to get really, really ugly. It says that Kane does not plan to return to Hotspur Way until he's granted his wish to leave. This is going to keep getting bad, keep getting uglier, and already, day one of not turning up to the training, the discourse was very much like I saw a lot of Spurs fans being like, oh, I don't know, it could be like COVID rules, and Fabrizio Romano was like, it's not COVID rules. And they were like, Fabrizio Romano, what does he know?
Come on.
It's probably COVID. He didn't have a COVID test. And I was like, okay, well, usually
Fabrizio Romano's not normally wrong.
Usually he's right, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's true. And now he's not turned up for the second day. And I'm sure there are still some Spurs fans who are like, he still couldn't find a COVID test. They ran out of PCR in North London.
PCRs take 72 hours.
It's ages. But yeah, no, it is now. It is now becoming pretty obvious that he's trying to force his move out. I think a fine is being prepared. Senior Spurs figures are said to be furious at the course of action, but they're not making any plans to sort of prepare for after Kane. They're not looking at trying to find another striker because they don't think that the conditions they would want for Kane to leave, which is apparently a foreign club offering £150 million, has been satisfied.
Well, I mean, they have done one thing, which is they've tied Heung-min Son down to another contract.
Yeah, and let's talk about that, because if I'm Heung-min Son, you're looking at a saga. Now, maybe he genuinely believes that Harry Kane is going to stay, and Harry Kane has said, like, oh, Sonny, like, come on, I'm just trying to get a pay increase.
Yeah.
But you're looking at a player who the whole thing about this saga is that he signs an ill-advised contract at a bad time, and Heung-min Son's gone, damn, that's crazy. Anyway,
we're talking.
oh God, wouldn't want to be in that situation. Anyway, what did you say, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it's a new 4-year deal as well. It's not insignificant.
Yeah, exactly. And he wasn't even on his final year of his contract.
No. Again, though, he'll have been sold a dream. He would have sold the dream of we want you to be the new talisman star. We're going to build our team around you. We're going to invest in you.
Surely, and I say this largely because it's the official position of Spurs, but surely a part of the conversation with Heung-min Son when he signed was Harry Kane will stay.
So I think so.
So if he now leaves,
probably not the contract.
That's what I'm saying. His agent needs to put a Kane clause in the contract. If you sell Harry Kane, I'm also off. Because that could be Spurs next summer. It's not that impossible to believe that. If Harry Kane goes this summer and Heung-min Son is just really discontented, he might also not be turning up for training this time next year.
Well, you've got to remember, though, Spurs are famously incredibly good at investing their money when they get rid of a key player. So, I'm sure we'll be seeing 3 or 4 new, really high-quality players to take up the mantle.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
When we talked about this before the Euros, and I was like, I think Spurs should sell Kane because one of my big reasons was that I thought the window was going to have the big COVID discount. That doesn't really seem to have been the case so far.
Well,
Like,
I think
there have been a lot of high-profile moves, and even like with smaller clubs spending like 20 million here, 20 million there. I was looking through like a list of all the Premier League transfers so far,
yeah.
and like loads of players that are not that high-profile have been going for like 15, 20, 30 million. And I thought that I thought it was going to be a really sort of, penny pinching summer where everyone was going to be going for a little bit less because the global football landscape had lost so much money. And it just doesn't really seem to have happened. So in Spurs, I thought the Spurs were going to be in a scenario where if they had sold, let's say, Harry Kane to City for 150 million, that 150 million would have stretched further than usual. And so they would have been able to buy nominally £250 million worth of players in a normal window. But that doesn't seem to be the case.
No, I mean, I think the main thing is everyone had their penny pinching summer last summer. Apart from Chelsea, who were just throwing their money around and managed to nab like a really high profile starlet like Kai Havertz as a result. A lot of the big clubs didn't put a lot of money into signings over the summer.
I'm not even talking about not putting a lot of money. A lot of, I mean, I thought this, and also a lot of people in across the football landscape was saying like, oh, it's not a good summer to sell because prices are going to be down because the general marketplace is down because of COVID, and that. I mean, I could be wrong, but that just seems to not be true. There seems to be all these, obviously, the high-profile signings like your Achraf Hakimis and Jadon Sancho. I always expected to still sort of be in the higher price, and Jadon Sancho maybe was a little bit cut price, but contract stuff. But yeah, for the most part, the average signing has not been cheaper as far as I've seen. I could be wrong.
A lot of players have just had a Euros to boost their price as well.
I guess. But yeah, like a lot of, I don't know, I had a list up earlier and I was seeing Southampton had put like 15 million to a player and Palace, which I want to talk about later, but like all 15 million here, 50 million there, and I was like, I thought this was going to be the summer of the 8 million bargain player.
No, I think just, it always feels like the Premier League is getting wider and wider in terms of competitiveness. For example, Villa had a really competitive season but finished 11th. And, teams like West Ham coming into the mix, Leicester remaining at the top, and the teams that are now normally finishing kind of almost 6th to 9th, like Spurs and Arsenal and people like that. It's so competitive at the moment that clubs just have to.
Yeah.
You've got to keep moving or you're going to die. It's like sharks swimming.
Very true. Speaking of, so we've just talked about, obviously, Grealish and Kane there from the player's perspective of the move. How about we take a step back and look at Manchester City as a whole? Because Manchester City obviously won the league last season. They were in the Champions League final, and, I would argue on paper were the stronger team, but Pep Guardiola just decided to kind of throw, which also makes me chuckle because I'm just like, is Jack Grealish going to go there, play as an 8 really well all season, and in the Champions League final against Bayern Munich, and we played it right back, and City will lose.
Put him in the pivot.
Yeah, exactly. Harry Kane and Jack Grealish played defensive mid. But yeah, so stepping back and looking at City, if they sign both these players, which it looks like that's their intention, for a long time it looked like it might be one or the other, but they're now looking to sign both of them apparently. Is that on?
Is that fair?
I mean, that's kind of crazy, right? Are they going to
just put like motherload, cheat code?
Honestly, yeah, that's kind of wild, right? To sign a £100 million player in Jack Grealish and then potentially also 130, and that's their peak, but plus player in Harry Kane when you've already won the league. That's kind of wild, right?
So it's a bit of overkill, isn't it?
But it's always, I don't know, like we've had this conversation in the past about like players putting money in, and we have a little conversation about it slightly lower down. And I've always kind of had the view of like, it's kind of fun when teams put a lot of money in, and when a new team gets money put in, that's especially fun. And Manchester City, I think, in a lot of ways, it's really impressive what they've built because they are a club that came from, a much, much more reserved position than a lot of the other teams at the top. And on, in theory, I like that. We talked about it in the Newcastle episode. I like the idea that football is not a monolith. You haven't got 2 or 3. What I think is a bit dodgy of Man City is they've now sort of like turned around, and even though they were the first club to leave the Super League, they were like, haha, great that we were able to do this. This should always be the case. Except. But yeah, no, in theory, I don't have a problem with it, but it is getting to the point with Manchester City where it's feeling a little bit perverse. I'm kind of like, they're testing the limits.
Well, like, it's getting ugly now.
It's getting a little bit out of hand, and I just don't want to be sat at the point where we're looking back at the Premier League in 20 years' time, and Man City have won 20 leagues in a row, and they just keep hoovering up all the best players in the league and the resources, like they're sort of sucking it dry.
Yeah, well, like a la Bayern kind of thing.
Yeah, a la Bayern, or like, I mean, in La Liga it's not so much because at least there's 2 clubs.
3. Three. Give Atletico a chance.
3 including Atletico. If you look at who's won the league over like the last 30 years, Atletico have won a fraction of what the other two have won.
Sure.
And I say La Liga because La Liga was like the classic one for us growing up. It was like Barca, Real, and no one. And that was the argument that everyone always made. Everyone was always like, oh, the Premier League is the best league in the world because there's all these different teams that come up.
Yeah.
And it changed a lot in like the 90s and all, and that was really interesting. And it does concern me that we might be getting to a point now where Man City are just going to have this unchallenged dominance. For listeners, Rupert has turned to me a graphic of the 2021 La Liga table. I was aware that Atletico had won the league. I was just
you did know.
pointing out that over the last 30 years, it has mostly been Real Madrid and Barcelona.
You're right. I know, it's a shame, isn't it? Because that was our one leg to stand on, that the Prem was the best league in the world because it was so competitive, but City could well run away with it. I mean, the one thing I would say is, like, I kind of feel like them signing these players is just more of the same. It's not new for them. They've been doing it already for like 5 years.
I disagree, though. The one thing that most City fans will tell you, and it's always been not a bad argument, but it's always been something that is objectively true, is that they've spent a lot of money and they've spent on a lot of players, but they've never made these enormous signings. And if they do go out and spend 100 million, 130 plus million on 2 players, that's a real statement of intent. And it just makes me think, like, if they're willing to do that once, it's not like next summer they're going to go, well, we did it once and that's that. What's next after that? And Mbappe the following summer, all that. And it just makes me think of maybe a better example than La Liga, because it's a more recent example. And an example, again, that was changed last season. But if you look at the last 10 years, is Serie A. And for ages, especially for like people who are...
Who won Serie A?
Yes, no, I'm aware. What I'm saying is, for ages in the 80s and the 90s and the noughties, people would say like Serie A had the best talent. People loved the Milan into Juventus thing. Napoli were really good as well, and all these teams sort of, and obviously Roma as well, and Fiorentina, and all these fantastic teams all battling for it, but mainly those sort of top 3. And then for the last 10 years, excepting the most recent one, Juventus have won the league, and the general interest in Serie A outside of Italy has just massively waned, because for the average observer, you just look at it and you go, and that has had a bit of a roll-on effect, because less international attention, less money into the league, and it's kind of a vicious circle. So Juventus have found it easier to stay at the top because there's been less money and less interest and less sponsorship going into Serie A.
Yeah, and it just breeds...
Yeah, and I worry about that with the league, with the Premier League, because one of the really interesting things is, not just whoever wins, but just all these teams who come up and have really good seasons, whether it's a Leeds or whether it's a Villa, like we were talking about, or whether it's looking at someone like Palace this window and go, oh, could they have like a bit of a dark horse year? And it just worries me to think that we could be in this situation like Serie A, where you get one club that just dominates and it's a vicious circle and no one else can really catch up because it just feeds into itself.
Yeah, but it is also, it's a bit of a cycle as well, in the same way that, you know, it was competitive and then Juventus dominated for a while and now it's competitive again, like suddenly starting to become like a 3-4 horse race again, in the same way that the Premier League 15 years ago was Man U pretty much. And then it got competitive again, and then maybe City started to exert a little bit more dominance. It does come in cycles.
What's United's longest streak? 3?
I think they won 3 in a row. Maybe only 2, but I think they won 3.
I'd say 98, 99, 99,000, 2001, maybe? No? I don't know. Anyway, the point,
sure.
we've never had like a streak of 9 in a row.
No, we haven't had 9 in a row. You're right. I do worry about that as well. I think just Kane alone is going to be frightening to consider. But I mean, you say that they haven't spent too much money on any individual player, but like, De Bruyne was almost 70 million.
Yes, but every top team has spent at least 70 million on one player, and their thing is that they've done it on all these players.
Like every player they buy is 50 million.
Yeah, 100%. But like, it's not like, that's the one thing. It's not even something I subscribe to, but that's the thing that like a lot of City fans say. People are like, oh, you spend loads of money, and they're like, actually. Even though, you know...
What argument is that? It's like, no, we didn't spend 150 million on one player, we spent 200 million on 4 players. How can you really argue that?
I suppose the argument there is that you're not always going out and sort of doing the Real Madrid and spending loads and loads of money on fully formed players who are sort of, the work's already done for you. They have, with a lot of their signings, taken relatively safe punts, but punts nonetheless. Like when Kevin De Bruyne came to Man City, he'd had a really, really good season at Wolfsburg, but he wasn't the player he is now. He wasn't as good as he was now. Similarly, Aguero when he came from Atletico Madrid. Similarly, David Silva when he came over from Valencia. Like a lot of these players that they signed were good players at the time who have then become and grown. And I think maybe you could argue like it was clear to anyone they were going to become top players, but it's not quite the same as doing something like buying Harry Kane, who is already world class. Yeah,
no, you're right. It'll definitely be a statement of intent and a flex, both financially and just like power within the country. Speaking though, as we are on Tuesday evening, Man City have only made one signing so far this window, which was Scott Carson for free from Derby.
Shrewd.
Shrewd.
Man City are nothing if not shrewd. I've always said this.
There you go, savvy even. The purse strings are tight, maybe.
I think it'll be interesting also to see how, when you think about these two players going, one is very easy to understand how he's going to fit in, and that's Jack Grealish, because there are a lot of players who already play that in that same mould. You can imagine him fitting in as any one of a number 10, a free 8, a sort of left winger, a bit like Phil Foden played several games for them. You can see him fitting into all those roles comfortably. What is interesting, and I think this was another thing that you brought up, is thinking about how Harry Kane would fit in there. Because obviously his best position, and what would make the most sense, is that of an out-and-out striker. But Pep's system, especially last season, has really moved away from that. And has that come at a time when Harry Kane's role has moved away from being an out-and-out striker? Obviously, last season in the league, he was dropping down a lot. He was, created the most assists. He was coming into midfield a lot more. And in the Euros, much to our rage,
rage is good.
Much to our chagrin, I went more heavy.
Rage is better.
Harry Kane was very frequently dropping extremely deep and coming back to collect the ball. And I wonder if that has informed, because they did want to sign him last summer, but I wonder if this is why they're now going for it, because Pep has gone, a 9 or a 9.5.
Well, I mean, he's slowly been adding more strings to his bow over the last few years, Harry Kane, and he's a pretty well-rounded player, despite how annoying it is sometimes when he does drop off from the front line. But I mean, that's what City want in their system, and But is it what they need? Well,
if you're going to sign Harry Kane, surely as City, and this is why I think most people assume is the way.
Aguero does, and the system works for Aguero.
Not really. Aguero is good on the ball beyond being a striker, but a lot of the time he'd be sat on the last shoulder and be going forward, and that's why he didn't, as well as injury, but didn't play that much in their sort of in this last season. And then when he did play, they employed I think that one of the games they played like a 4-4-2, because the way that City were playing last season had kind of evolved beyond the way that Aguero played. And when I think about Harry Kane, I think what everyone is expecting is sort of almost like a FIFA manager mode type, Aguero out rather, and Kane in, and Kane's just going to be slapped up top as a number 9. And that's what makes the most sense. But as we know with Josep Guardiola, what makes the most sense is not always what happens, for better or for worse.
Well, that is definitely true. I could see it being quite a potent combination, actually, of him dropping deep and allowing more space for these like threatening wingers to come through. As long as it doesn't give Raheem Sterling too many chances on goal, and other people get chances as well, then I think City going to be fine.
I guess the big question is, will he start every game?
Harry Kane
signs for 150 million. He's like, I'm here, I'm ready, and then Pep's like,
cool.
I was like, okay, well,
let me introduce you to
Liam Delap starting today, mate. I think actually he's gone on loan to Stoke City. Well, that's in the works, actually, which is something I've thought about.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
that is exciting.
It might not be official yet, but yeah.
Legacy. Special.
This is heritage. He's going to go there, look around and be like, I want to go home.
I made a mistake.
Shall we move into useless trivia before moving into our next story, which is a little bit linked in an interesting way? What have you got for us this week for useless trivia?
So I've got something which I think probably might never be replicated, which is that a Qatar football player called Almoez Ali has become the first ever player in the history of football to score in the Asian Cup, the Copa America, and the CONCACAF Gold Cup. So for people that are wondering, that's Asia, South America, and North and Central America.
Is that because I remember reading that the Copa America invited people in sometimes? Because like the US have played in the Copa America.
Yeah, so there are a couple of teams always get invited.
Yeah.
So I think the US have like an open invitation every year.
Yeah.
And then they also invite a couple of special teams each year. I think Japan did it a year or two ago. So yeah, they invite teams from other parts of the world to participate. And Qatar did.
Do I think that's a cool idea, or do I think that's nonsense? I can't quite figure it out.
I kind of like it.
In theory, I do as well, but I wonder if they deliberately don't invite anyone who's too good.
I wouldn't be surprised.
The Copa America, they're like, don't invite Germany.
That's why America gets to go every year.
America, they're like, yeah, like come along and play.
Funky town.
What do you have, a baseball team or something? Yeah, send them along.
I think it'd be quite cruel to be like, oh, so yeah, Germany just like fresh off the back of winning the World Cup. Like, why don't you come and play Honduras? I think that would be cool.
Still buoyed from their win. They just smash Honduras in their own back garden, 8-0.
Especially after crushing Brazil like 7.
Exactly. Yeah, I think Germany are never ever getting invited.
No,
yeah,
should they be?
I think that's an interesting thing. And so he in Qatar has been invited to both the.
He scored in all competitions.
That's really interesting.
All 3 of those cups, and I think that might never be done again.
Yeah, very possibly. I have gone for a slightly different one, and that is that there are 5 different asteroids that are named after footballers and football managers. Only one of them, well, a few of these people have been players and managers, but one is most notable for being a manager, and the other 4 are more notable for being players. And the asteroids are the 33179 Arsene Wenger, the 14282 Cruyff, the 10634 Pepe Bican, which is after Josef Bican, the 82656 Puskas, and the 79647 Ballack.
Wow.
Quite an assortment of characters there.
It's not a traditional collection of players.
If I'd asked you to guess the 5 that it was, you'd probably go like Maradona, Pele, maybe Puskas would make it on there, but...
Yeah, I'd also probably guess someone like Nicholas Bentner.
For full movie value. But like someone like Michael Ballack, it's kind of a rogue one.
It is a rogue one, but he's such an icon in Germany. He's so loved in Germany. I mean, how many of these asteroids are actually owned by the players that they're named after?
I don't think any of them.
Yeah, none of them. So all it takes is like one super fan with a buttload of cash, right?
Like all the scientists that discovered it.
All the scientists that discovered it. That's true. That is a funny one. That is, I think, you win uselessness.
It's extremely useless.
Like, my uselessometer is going off the charts.
That meteor that I was talking about hitting the Etihad.
The Arsene Wenger.
The Arsene Wenger.
3799 Arsene Wenger.
Man City have tried to sign Saka. What's this?
Out of nowhere.
Looking at our next and maybe last, depends on how much time we have, topic. It's another interesting big signing, but a big signing that's a little bit different to what we were talking about with Grealish and Kane. But one I want to talk to you about because it's a little bit out of the Premier League, but it's still very interesting. And that is Paul Mullin signing for Wrexham. And the reason this is an interesting signing is a couple of good reasons. First, obviously, Wrexham have been a really talked about side recently because of their sort of ownership by Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney. There's that documentary coming up of them that's being produced, I think, by their film company, which will obviously be a good watch, and I'm sure everyone will be really excited about it. But that's also that this player, Paul Mullin, has just been playing for Cambridge United in League 2, and his 32 goals in 46 league games last season not only got Cambridge United promoted to League 1, but saw him named the League 2 Player of the Season. Wrexham, for those less familiar with the football pyramid, are playing in the National League this coming season, and so Paul Mullin has left Cambridge United, who would have been playing in League 1, to join National League Wrexham, which is a bizarre move. It's kind of the reverse Jack Grealish, if you like.
He's dropped down in several leagues. Yeah.
He's decided to drop down. He's also relatively young. It's not like this is sort of... I think he's 26 years old. But it's a very, very weird signing. I think I've written it down. Is he? Yeah, he is 26. So yeah, it seems a bizarre decision to move 2 leagues down. And it reminds me a lot of... do you remember that player that moved from... he moved to Salford City from Aberdeen, Adam Rooney?
Yes.
And at the time, he was being paid £4,000 a week, and there was a load of people who were kicking off about it. Accrington Stanley's owner, Andy Holt, accused Salford of buying their way in. And I just wanted to get your view on what you think, because I have an opinion on this, and I wanted to get your opinion on...
It's like an opinion with a capital O.
Yeah, capital O, yeah. An opinion on what you think about sort of these these signings, these moves, like, is it healthy for a player to want to leave League One to join the National League? Is it just because of money? Is it because of this, this documentary, for example? I think it's going to be very widely watched. He might be thinking, I just scored 32 goals in League Two.
Yeah.
Could score 40 in the National League.
Decimate the National League.
And that's going to be filmed. That could be...
He will decimate the league. I mean, all I'll say is, 6 months ago, all I wanted was for Messi to join Port Vale. So, am I okay with a top-class player joining a side like lower than his standing? Yes, absolutely. Do I think it's hilarious? At times, yes, absolutely. I'm slightly less of a fan of it in terms of Wrexham, just because kind of as Wrexham Watch continues, as we learn a little bit more about their business model and what they want to do with the club. They emphasised really early on that they wanted to, keep the ethos of, the community at the heart of what they were doing. They wanted to build something special there, and I do kind of feel like this is maybe biting very slightly too much off in terms of their ambitions. That might be maybe just, I don't know, you can call me naive for thinking that, but I do worry that it's not being done in a sustainable way. They're just kind of grabbing these top players from leagues many rungs above their own.
I kind of like it for a couple of reasons. I mean, firstly, what's interesting is that Paul Mullin was a free transfer. His contract actually expired at Cambridge United and they offered him a new one. And apparently, reportedly, his initial plan, the whole reason he hadn't signed a new contract, was to kick on and move up a league. And so everyone at Cambridge United was extremely surprised when the Comunicado Oficial came out. And it was he has moved to Wrexham. But, from Wrexham's perspective, what they have going for them is that they have these celebrity owners and also this documentary, which is a big draw. And apparently, Rob McElhenney actually FaceTimed him, and that was a big decider.
He said, he's it's not every day you get a call from Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously it's a big pull. So I like it maybe just because of sort of the sort of star factor, and maybe it's kind of a thing I just talked about how I feel about Man City. I like it now. In 3 years when Wrexham are playing in League One and they've won the league all 3 times, an absolute canter, I might be going, yeah, this is a little bit dodgy. But yeah, so far I thought it was interesting. But I think there's quite a few examples of this, and maybe my view would be a little different if I was a fully fledged fan of some of the sides down here. I mentioned obviously Accrington Stanley earlier, but a lot of these clubs are really unhappy with this sort of throwing your weight around in the National League because you don't need as much money to do it. Obviously, to establish a side in the Premier League and become massive, you need to throw in billions. Whereas here, you can just throw in millions and you can outstrip the competition.
For sure.
But weirdly, I think that's why I don't mind it as much. I think maybe my biggest issue with the whole sort of Chelsea and Manchester City and that sort of model of thing is that it's something that no one can really compete with. Only nation states and billionaires and ridiculous oligarchs.
Oh, well, but this is actually something that you could feasibly compete with.
In theory, it could happen to any club. There's only a handful of billionaires. There are tons of millionaires. There are conglomerates. The amount of money, and I don't have an exact figure, but the amount of money put into Wrexham so far, you wouldn't be surprised to see other clubs do it. All it takes is someone who is, done well for themselves or a conglomerate of people to throw money into a local club. And that seems less egregious to me when it's something that can easily happen to loads and loads of clubs. And it's the same way I feel about Salford. They haven't thrown a ridiculous amount of money into it, even though they could have. And I know a lot of people sort of are kicking off about the whole wage issue, and that is maybe a bit, but, the amount of money put in is not ridiculous to the point of being unattainable for anyone else. It is for the ownership structures of the other clubs at the moment, but someone could turn up and, we talked about Daniel Ek going for Dial Square FC. he could throw in a couple of million and turn them into a good side. So yeah, I find it less irritating, and also just because I think the documentary is going to be good.
It's going to be a good documentary. I'll agree with that one. I guess the main thing for me is I would have not a single problem with this even if they would just picked a Welsh player. Do you know what I mean? Someone from around that area, or.
He is an English player, so it's not like they've signed some mercenary from the other side of the planet.
True, but in the spirit of trying to keep it local and trying to build something there, I would quite like. I don't know. It maybe just feels a little more romantic in my mind.
Yeah.
That you would imagine someone like Hal Robson-Kanu going instead.
Well, I imagine probably, and I don't know, but I imagine probably a lot of the money that's gone into Wrexham will also be developing training facilities and scouting. So they may well have a generation of Welsh players coming through in the next few years.
I'm sure they will.
I'd be surprised if that wasn't a part of it. But yeah, no, I thought it was an interesting move, and I just did think I'd love to speak to the man himself and just be like, is your plan to score 40 goals on a documentary and turn that into like a move to Crystal Palace? Have you decided to do like one of the most big brain 2-step forwards, 1-step back moves in football history?
You've got to give the guy some credit. I who wouldn't want to do it is the other part of it. It's like,
it's great.
Why wouldn't you want to like get to know Ryan Reynolds and Rog McElhenney and like be like their unbelievably good signing? Like
if he's the face of that story.
Yeah, exactly.
And he scores, because you see like clubs make moves. It happens every now and again, but you see like someone from the National League or League Two go all the way up to the Premier League.
Sure thing. It can happen,
right?
It can happen. I mean, yeah. If he thinks to himself, "Look, I'm good enough to be in League One. I've proven that. Am I good enough to be in the Championship? Maybe."
But I think that's the whole thing. I think the reason he didn't sign with Cambridge United was because he thought he was better than League One. Or maybe it was a top-end League One club, but I think he wanted to move beyond where Cambridge United would have been.
Yeah.
So that, to me, says, like, are you taking deliberately two steps down, thinking that the exposure could get you to sort of, in a weird way, jump the whole ladder?
I think the main thing is, like, this is probably his one chance to be a superstar.
Well, exactly.
Like, I'm talking about, like, Premier League level superstar, like, talked about, like, household name kind of thing. This is it for him. So even if it doesn't lead to a Premier League move at the end of it, it's still. Well, do you know what I mean?
Already, I mean, no disrespect to any teams in League One or Cambridge United themselves, but had he signed a new contract to Cambridge United or moved to another League One club, it wouldn't have made that much news. He was trending on Twitter the day that he made that move.
Well, yeah, exactly.
But he moved down, and so that move was more high profile in a bizarre way than staying at the same level.
Well, just because everyone's so intrigued as to what this new look Wrexham is going to be like. Yeah. What are they going to do? It's just so interesting on so many levels. I mean, they've said all of the right stuff until now, in terms of like how they want to approach the project. I mean, the owners, that is. And it's exciting. I know what you mean. Like, I kind of said earlier that I wasn't 100% sure about it. I'm still not 100% sure, but I'm here for it. I like the narrative.
It's definitely very interesting. Wrapping us up with just a little bookend here, just a little thing I wanted to stand on a soapbox and talk about is the Olympics. The Olympics, obviously the football in the Olympics is what we're going to be focusing on here. But it's just been interesting to me how no one is as interested in Olympic football as they are in things like the Euros and the Copa America. And I sort of have often wondered why that is. Obviously, a big part of it is going to be the fact that it is under 23s, bar a few, I think it's 3 players per squad. But just the idea that there's this sort of huge tournament, and loads of people are interested in the Olympics anyway, the fact that that's never really taken off has just been surprising me, partly because this has been quite an interesting football Olympics. I've watched quite a few of the games, not least because Chris Wood, as I messaged you in a daze, in an absolute furore of excitement, was like 1 game away from being, or 2 games away from being, not a gold medalist, but just an Olympic medalist, because New Zealand's made it to the quarterfinals, I believe. But also just because there have been, it's an under-23s tournament, but there are some exciting players coming through. There's Takefusa Kubo, who plays for Japan, who has come through, plays for Real Madrid as well, and he's been really exciting this tournament before Japan got knocked out by Brazil. Gabriel Martinelli has he scored 1 goal for them early doors, but then who's the other guy? Is it Mateus Cunha? There's been loads of like interesting young players playing for all these different teams.
Yeah.
And I guess, people aren't exactly queuing up to watch the under-20s Euros and things like that. But you would have thought that with the name of the Olympics, which is so, I think it's like it is the most popular sporting event in the world, and then the most popular sport at the Olympics. Not like the most popular sport at the Olympics, but the most popular sport in a vacuum, football.
Yeah.
At the biggest sporting competition.
And then just
and they've come together. It's not a really big sporting event. It's just a weird one to me.
It is weird. I mean, I guess 2 things. One, Britain doesn't have a men's team in this. Like not in this. Not in this edition.
Yeah.
In this Olympics, like the FAs basically said no. The Scottish FA, the Welsh FA, the Northern Irish FA didn't want it, basically. So that's definitely part of why there isn't much coverage here. The women did decently, but their run has also come to an end. I think the other part is just, I don't know. Do you watch the Under-21 World Cup?
No, but I think surely this is like a little bit different. I mean, it should be anyway in my mind, but
why?
Well, partly because it's not just under 20s.
We've just watched the Euros.
We've just
watched some incredible football.
We have, and interestingly, some of the players. This is the other thing I thought was quite funny is that some of the players who played at the Euros and the Copa America are also playing here.
Yeah, we see Pedri just looks like the tiredest man alive.
Pedri, I think, I'm pretty sure Richarlison played for Brazil in Copa America. He was at least in the squad.
I think he did too.
So he's also in the final. So those two and a few others. There's Pau Torres, Unai Simon, Eric Garcia. Like half the Spanish team played in the Euros. So they played 2 back-to-back tournaments. They're in the final of this one. And they're in the semis of the Euros, which is pretty impressive.
It's intense. I remember watching the 2012 GB football team. I'm pretty sure Ryan Giggs was in it. I remember
Star-studded.
So exactly. We played Brazil. I remember watching that. I think we played Mexico, maybe, or Mexico won.
I think Mexico won in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I watched a few of those games. Maybe that's just my bad as like a fan. I'm not international enough in my interests. Like, if Great Britain aren't in it, then I'm probably going to be less inclined to get involved.
But that's what I mean. Part of why it's interesting is you look at the table, and so obviously the final is Brazil-Spain, so those are 2 very established football nations.
Big clubs.
But some of the teams that have got through, like Mexico did really well, Japan did really well, New Zealand did really well. None of those are. If I was to say to you, like, who do you think has the strongest under-23 squads around? List 10 teams. None of those would be in your top 10, would they?
No.
So it's just interesting to think of like, who could be the interesting players from this squad? I wonder if there's going to be anything you could learn about these up-and-coming players no one knows about. And then you've got the other players, like, for example, Pedri, who everyone has just finished creaming over all summer. Yeah. And now he's playing in another tournament and no one's interested. Seems weird.
Do you think it's just like a collective, like, we're not quite yet ready to be like hurt again by football?
We're tired, we're bruised.
Still,
maybe.
From England's... loss in the final.
Maybe. But like even just
you're
online
right,
stuff.
I agree with you. Like you would think that more people would be interested in seeing like Japanese youngsters that look really exciting.
Yeah.
And players like that. But we are where we are. I for one have not caught a single minute, I'm ashamed to say.
Well, there's a final on Saturday, so tune in for that if you can.
Maybe I shall.
I mean, I guess also actually, the other thing with it is a lot of these games I have been watching after the fact because they're at extremely bad times for UK viewers.
Well, yeah, that's also true. Are you going to be watching the final?
I'll almost certainly watch the final back. I probably won't watch it live, but...
not tempted to stay up until 4 a.m. on Monday morning.
I think it kicks off at midnight or 1, so I'll probably be either busy or asleep at Saturday at 1 in the morning.
Oh, it's on Saturday or Sunday?
Yeah. Well, Sunday morning.
I'm not against it, if you want to watch it.
Beers. And on that note, it's probably a great note to end it. Rupert, great to talk to you as always.
Cam, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone at home for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Cheers, guys. Bye.